Hello there, Mandy here. Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart is not just a podcast. It's also a book, a free online grief group, and a one-on-one private coaching practice. If you are interested in learning more, visit mandykapehart.com to find out how restorative grief can help you heal heart, mind, body, and spirit. Welcome back to Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart. You are listening to episode 243, titled Becoming a Grief Ally with Aly Bird. When someone you love loses someone they love, how do you typically react? Do you launch into action, delivering casseroles and organizing a phone tree for support? Do you settle into the shadows, waiting to be called upon in time? Or do you find yourself, like most people, a little frozen with the fear of saying or doing the wrong thing, long enough, often, that you feel things will be a little more normal by the next time you see them? While there is no correct way to be a healthy grief ally to the person you love, there are more helpful ways to move toward others when they're dealing with a loss. And today's guest is full of wonderful insight and wisdom on how to do just that. Grief therapist and author Aly Bird wrote the book Grief Ally after her husband Will died while hiking alone. Because the initial advice of finding a grief community didn't fit quite right for her, she realized her own experience needed a little more intentionality and decided to write the book to bring that intentionality for you as well. Hey everyone, welcome back to Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart. I am your host, Mandy, and today I'm going to start our conversation with something that might sound a little bit obvious, but just stick with me. The grief experience is very different for every single one of us. And what you might not realize is the way we support others through grief is also highly unique. Because of that, it can still be really helpful to have someone who has walked the road before give us advice, insight, and support on how to create a strong sense of self-awareness and self-compassion as we are supporting others through grief and supporting ourselves. But these pieces of grief support aren't necessarily what come to mind when we start thinking about how do we take care of someone and love someone who's grieving. And so my guest today sets the stage for how growing in our own self-awareness is foundational for those of us who want to become healthy and reliable grief allies to those that we love. Aly, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Mandy. What a great intro. Thank you.
Thanks. I wrote it myself.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I love it.
Excellent. Well, Aly, start with just telling our audience a little bit about why you decided, oh, I should write this book about becoming a grief ally and how to support others through loss.
Great question. So my story starts probably very similar to your listeners who find your podcast. When I was 30, the love of my life, the person that I chose to spend the rest of my life with, died unexpectedly in a hiking accident. And I very, very quickly realized, being the person that I am, is that there were a whole bunch of resources out there for the people like me at the epicenter of a tragedy. But there were loads of people around me asking the questions of, what do I do? How do I help? And they were all relying on me for the answers. And if I thought that was overwhelming, the capable, very ambitious kind of person that I am, I was overwhelmed by all of that. I thought, there must be others out there that are asking these questions. And what if we actually equipped them with the knowledge, gave them a starting point about how to answer those questions for the people that they're showing up with for. And so that's where the book came from, was trying to create a resource that people could reach for when, the inevitable and the terrible happens in their life, so that they can show up as the best version of themselves for the person that they love and help them through the long haul of grief.
Yeah, I think you and I are probably quite similar in that regard of now we have all of these other people that we want to care for and support and love, but we're the ones at the center of this loss. How are we supposed to navigate now that we have this homework on how to writing a how-to book for others to do this so they don't cause us more harm and we're not spending all of our energy consoling them?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's a hard job. Like, we don't we don't live in a culture that talks about grief. We don't live in a culture that really comprehends or gives space to how long term of a process grief is.
Yeah.
And so, people end up falling short, not because they want to fall short, but just because there aren't go to conversations, books, resources that really equip them to show up for the long haul in the ways that the bereaved really need.
Yeah. One thing I appreciated about your book is the brevity of it, because I think when we're grieving or when we're trying to quickly resolve or help with something, someone through their losses, reading a 300-page novel is not going to make us feel very prepared, right? It's overwhelming. And so I really appreciated the length of this. And also you wrote it specifically with a chapter or a promise starting each chapter and ending with a little summary to make it even more palatable. So tell me about the value and the purpose of starting with a promise in each chapter.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm a bit of probably a poet at heart, perhaps.
Mm,
And it just felt like the right the right thing to offer someone. It's like if you can follow the steps and keep your promises, like
mm,
this is going to work out for you and the person that you're showing up for. And that's really what it was. I wanted to show people an illustration of the kind of support that I got from the people who cared about me the most. And just the simplest way that people could consume that, I think, was, in a promise.
yeah. Well, because you tell the story that your grief experience of being a widow in groups where other widows were discussing how overlooked and how unseen and how unsupported they felt, your experience was quite different.
Yeah. So, early on, and I think a lot of people get this message, your listeners probably included, is go find community, go find people like you. Because, we live in these outlier experiences sometimes.
Yeah.
And I really didn't connect with the people in the widow groups. Like, there's the one difference was my age, obviously, but the even bigger piece was that I found like 70% of the conversations were just people, feeling like they were being forgotten or left behind or completely misunderstood in their experience with grief. And I wasn't having that. I for whatever reason have cultivated a group of people around me throughout my life that showed up despite being afraid and unsure and being willing to make mistakes, and to really listen and validate what I was experiencing. So I didn't feel alone. In those early days, I felt very supported and loved and cared for.
Well, I think the having the right community around you is always the goal in life, whether we're grieving or not. And it is extremely hard to cultivate those relationships and maintain them over time. And I think about the people that were, in my life when I started grieving the loss of my mom or my grandfather. I've had so many losses and so many different communities around me at those times. And I'm just thinking about how they so quickly and eagerly jump into action, but maybe don't regard themselves or their own state, inner state, right? That inner world and where they are at, when they come in to say, I'm here as a witness. And so I'm curious, how does your work help grief allies recognize their own humanity and their own inner states and their own shortcomings in a helpful way and not in a, you shouldn't go help them because you're also broken or you're also messy?
Mm. I think, a lot of that work starts with permission that, like, this affects you too, right? Like it's not necessarily that you were close to the person who died. You might not have never met them at all or had a relationship, but your person is going to change because of their grief, right? The person that you show up for. And that's going to impact you. And you're allowed to have your own thoughts and feelings about that. So the first step is really acknowledging that this is a change for you too. And I think that's where all of this starts. I think that's very clear early on in the book, is that you need to be able to give yourself the permission to feel something, about this. And when you do that, you approach grief allyship you approach showing up for your bereaved person in a much more courageous way, I think, because you're not trying to fix anything. You're like, hey, this is shitty for everyone all around, but I'm willing to be here with you in it and change together.
Yeah, I think you nailed it right there with recognizing this will affect all of us. And we don't necessarily see our person who is grieving as someone who is also going to irrevocably change in a way that we may not recognize, or maybe they don't recognize. And I also know that people who are trying to support a griever are trying to maintain the status quo as much as possible. No, 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 there's no change. Nothing's different here. It's going to be all the same and just as easy. And I think about that as the like invitation to us to also wrestle with our own stuff, our own, like, how have I tried to insulate myself from loss? And certainly that's a very long conversation and a long line of inquiry toward ourselves. But the baseline being, it is okay to recognize that we are all moved by the love that we shared, by the love, whether it's for the person who, to your point, we knew them and they're gone now, or we didn't know them, but we love this person who loves them deeply. Hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Talk to me about someone who is the value of someone who is willing to be like waiting in the wings. So, as a grief ally, and that can recognize that there are long-term care needs, not just immediate food and beverage and childcare and whatever needs pop up right away in losses.
Yeah, I think when someone dies and we all have this innate desire to show up and help, it can feel really immediate that you have to show up right now and do everything. And what I teach in the book is that, and any person who is bereaved will understand this, that grief is a long-term experience. It's going to last forever. And the value of you leaning into what you are really good at, and if you are close enough to your person to that you're supporting, to let them know like, hey, I can help with this, this, and this. The greatest act of love that you can show them is letting them put you on the field, to use a sports analogy, when they are ready to put you on the field,
Yeah.
rather than competing with everybody who is trying to show up right in the early days, weeks, months. It is a huge gift to recognize, hey, I am part of a team, and the person that I am supporting recognizes that we all have strengths on this team, and I am just waiting to use my strength.
Mm, I love that. I am also a soccer coach, so sports analogies land very clean for me. So love it. Um, I'm also thinking, even just staying in the sports analogy, thinking about how when it comes to being a grief ally, there are so many people on the roster, so many people available that want to be available. But I know they hesitate because they're afraid of saying the wrong thing, or not understanding how to actively listen, or having some kind of belief that keeps them locked and protected away from the vulnerability of making a mistake, or of having to like reconcile, oh, I said something unhelpful and now I'm ashamed and I don't want to go back. How would you invite people into that very vulnerable space where they're going to make mistakes, and that's an okay thing to do?
Yeah, I I name this like right up front in Grief Ally, in that whenever you choose to say something, do something, you're making a courage that's a courageous act, right? You don't know how it's going to land. You know, we've named in this conversation that grief changes people. It will change this person you are caring about. It will change you because of your relationship dynamic. And every action that you take is an experiment. And I like to, lead with that. So what I find is the uncourageous act, or the more cowardly act, is to say nothing. That protects you from failing per se, but none of this is a failure, right? It's gaining more information. You lean in, you do something. If it doesn't land, the best thing that you can do is follow up. You can apologize, and that's okay. I think, the greatest act of love is being willing to put yourself in what Brene Brown would call the arena, do the vulnerable, hard thing and tell the person that you're doing it because you love them. And if it doesn't land, you say, I'm sorry, I'm going to try something else next time. Yeah. And if your person loves you enough and that unconditional love is reciprocal, then it's all going to work out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You actually just like walked me into the thought I was having earlier when I was reading your book. I was taking voracious notes the second time around reading it in preparation for this. And I just loved how you called out, hey, strength is necessary, but weakness is the opposite of strength. And we cannot be grief allies who unintentionally minimize healthy grief expressions through judgment or condemnation or accusation. And I'm just curious, how can grief allies move away from trying to quickly affirm a griever and say, it's okay that you don't feel good, like it's fine, but in doing so, disregarding the nuance of what they're actually grieving and how they're actually feeling?
I honestly I think it just comes down to being a really great listener. I inviting conversation, commentary over and over and over again, and being really willing to just sit there and bear witness to the reaction that someone is having. And that doesn't exclusively have to be the experience of, distress or sadness or despair, right? It can be bearing witness to the joy that someone is feeling as well, and naming the caliber of change that you are witnessing in someone. Not necessarily change in oh, you're not crying so much today, what's happening for you? But hey, I see how far you've come. What's that like for you?
Yeah.
Which I think is part of the long haul of grief, right? Yeah. We have these expectations that grief is the sadness, the despair, the distress, the trauma. But with time and somebody doing the work to be with all that is difficult, there is still change that happens for them. And so bearing witness to that, how their life is unfolding because of the really important person that they've lost, is also a really kind, compassionate way to be with them in their grief.
Yeah, it is. And when you said it's part of the long haul of grief, it made me think about those of us who are years into the losses and have many people who still care, who still love us, who still want to know how we're doing, who understand, hey, the loss is still like yesterday sometimes. And sometimes it's like it's been a lifetime, right? Then the shift is frequent and unpredictable. But I wonder, you had this wonderful phrase in the book talking about grief allies who check in just to check in before checking out again. And it made me first feel very oh no, am I doing that? Am I engaging and then piecing out very quickly? Because we only have so much capacity to maintain ongoing relationship with people. But it really talk about that checking in just to check in. And what does it look like for us to create sincerity and intentionality without inundating ourselves? Because we all know more than one person who is grieving or who has grieved a significant loss. But at what point are we performing the relationship? How can we know that we're not just sincerely checking in saying, hey, it's been a while, talk to me?
Yeah, I mean, I think the checking in starts with you.
So good.
It's checking in with yourself and being hey, why why do I feel the need right now to
Mm.
reach out?
Yeah.
Is it because you actually are curious and you have the space and time to hear the response to the questions that you're asking? Or is it because, this person is just crossing your mind? And I think having that awareness should inform how you go about checking in.
Mm.
So if you do have the space and time, it is about saying, hey, I'm here, I'm available, I'm able to have a conversation if you want one. I used to offer this very shortly after my partner died. My best friend's partner died as well, which was a strange and weird thing. But something that I offered to her was a check in with, hey, I'm free now until, 2 hours later. And then I have a commitment. If at any time in the next 2 hours you want to chat, I am here. And that was a great, like, we put some boundaries around it, we put some parameters, so it wasn't just that I put a message out into her world,
Yeah.
and if she responded, I didn't have the capacity to respond back.
Yeah.
But then there are other times where it's like, hey, she crossed my mind, and what I would do is send a message saying, hey, I'm just thinking of you. And both of those are great, but they also like respect the time that I can give and her expectations for how much attention I can give her in that moment as well.
Yeah, I really love how even though you've written what can be called like a guidebook, an instruction book, an instruction manual on how to support grievers, um, what you just named really teaches us, hey, we have to recognize and begin to value flexibility and agreements within relationship over the idea of a checklist of like, this is how you reach a griever. This is how you fill this role really well. So how does that more open-minded stance keep us like available for the long haul of grief?
Yeah, great question. I If we go back to the promises that I laid out in the book, I think that I wrap up the book by saying, follow the steps and keep your promises. And what they really offer are a set of guidelines for unconditionally loving someone or providing like unconditional positive regard if it's more of a coworker and it's not super okay to tell them that you love them. But it's by keeping those promises about unconditional love, about committing to understanding how their grief is unfolding over time and how their life is changing because of it, being willing to continuously show up despite being afraid of making mistakes. That's how you stay in a great relationship with someone. It's not through silence and fear. It's about vulnerability and presence and care. And I want to name that's not easy. Right? This is not easy work. This is the messy part of being human, but I also think it's the kind of care that we all need and deserve in the most challenging parts of life, which include when somebody dies.
Yeah. Yeah, you throughout the book named vulnerability, courage, and humility as the necessary components for being able to become a grief ally and keep your promises and follow the so-called steps. But I think for someone who is new to grief world, this work that you've created is gold. It is a gold mine for someone who is absolutely deer in headlights, lost at the idea of how much pain their loved one is in and how little control they have over it. It makes me think a lot about how when we are in our own lives feeling out of control of something, we can become so critical. We can dip into that survival mode that says, well, let me just control it and fix it and try to limit exposure to more grief or more loss or more pain. But that also puts us into a judgmental mindset. And we talked about it a minute ago, but I would just love to hear from your life a story about like when you noticed yourself in a judgmental mindset about how someone else was grieving and how it wasn't going to be good to jump down their throat and say, don't do that. That's a bad way of grieving. Or I don't know about your work, but like I constantly hear people ask, am I doing this wrong? Am I doing this wrong? Because they want the judgment. They want the control in the sense of like clarity, right? Because it helps us feel like, oh, no, this is progress. But I'm just curious, are you the one among us who has not ever slipped into judging someone's grieving process?
That's a great question. I think, the my own personal experience and then the efforts that I went to write the book itself have given me, and in the work that I do today, like working exclusively with bereaved young people, I do a pretty good job through regulating myself so that I can hold space without judgment.
Yeah.
But I do look back, on some of the choices and actions that I took before I lost the love of my life, and definitely would have responded different knowing what I know now.
Yeah.
The things that I said or didn't say, um, yeah, I wish I could go back and change those things, but that's life.
Yeah.
And we do better once we know better, right? So
Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
You've mentioned it a few times that you work on self regulation fairly consistently. What is one easy tool that you have that you rely on for kind of a quick self regulation that doesn't require a quiet space or a calm
Mm,
mind or ability to go somewhere for the next hour alone?
right. I I have a couple. I'm a big fan of doing I don't even know if there's a name for it, but like a body scan, but not like an actual body scan. So it's not an internal experience. It's like you're actually touching your body. So you're like, if you're listening to this, like I'm rubbing like my hands down my arms, and I remind myself, I'm like, this is my body.
Yeah.
These are my arms. These are my legs. These are my hands. And I touch all of those parts of my body, as a reminder that's like, I'm here, I'm right now, I'm safe. Um, that one makes me feel very much in control when I'm feeling out of control, knowing that, like, hey, I can move my body, I can feel my body. Breathing, big proponent of breathing. I tell people how good they're breathing when they're breathing around me. Um, all of that is great. If I'm driving, I will sing.
Perfect.
Or if it depends on the environment that I'm in, but singing is usually a big
Yeah.
piece of it. Yeah, those are the quick ones.
I love it because breath work specifically always makes me giggle because people are so opposed to the idea of breath work being helpful when
Mm,
they are grieving or to settle themselves. At one point recently, my daughter, who's almost 12, looked at me when she was feeling frustrated. And I said, hey, just take a breath. And she looked over. She goes, I'm literally trying to take a breath, but you keep talking to me. And I'm like, totally. Yep. 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 Sorry. Yep. Walking away now. It is so much more foundationally supportive than we realize. And I don't think we notice how quickly we give it up our breath when we are under duress or worried about harming someone or feeling harmed ourselves. So yes, I like all three of those, but I also love that you're willing to, hey, good job breathing to someone near
yeah,
you.
100%. I do that with clients all the time. And, it's a particularly distressing moment for them. And
Yes.
they've stopped talking to, like, express the emotion. And once they catch their breath, I remind them of, like, yeah, great breathing, great breathing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to try that more frequently with friends in public as well and just see if they can
Yeah.
tolerate it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Speaking of tolerating my odd behaviors in public, my community around me has become more grief literate because of my work, of course. And I can only imagine yours is similar to that. But we're still in this culture that doesn't want to name grief, and it doesn't want to really talk about these hard, uncomfortable, unresolvable experiences that we are going through. But you named this cultural revolution that we're seeing, because there are more of us out here talking about this more frequently. And yet it still feels like we're fighting against just unprocessed loss all around us. So I'm curious, what is your vision and your hope for the grief community around you, but more generally in our culture, to learn about living through loss?
Yeah, great question. Um, I think, you know, to take a few steps back, the reason that I wrote Grief Ally is that I thought it was particularly unfair that people had to leave their communities to find people who got it.
Yeah.
And I think by people, the simple act, whether you buy my book or not, of being willing to be next to someone who is enduring a great loss will inevitably change you, increase your grief literacy, make you a more resilient human. And that's the kind of world that I want to live in, is with people who are willing to say, hey, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm willing to show up and learn. And I think that's the best we can hope for, because then bereaved people get to continue to like feel that love and connection that they had, rather than disconnection and abandonment, because that doesn't lead to anything good. And instead they get to live really big, beautiful lives that include their grief, but also include all the other big things in the existing communities, social networks that they've always been a part of, rather than having to go out and forge new connections at a time when your energy is limited and you're probably in a lot of hurt. And that's my simplest hope for the future, honestly, is that everybody can get that kind of care when the worst thing happens to them.
Yeah, I love that. I'm envisioning a world if I hadn't needed to leave my community for the grief I was carrying, and how different it would be right now and how impactful that would certainly be. Aly, I feel like we could probably relate on a lot more levels and talk for a lot longer, but I know your time is precious. Tell our listeners where they can find a copy of your book if they would like to pick one up.
Yeah, absolutely. You can find it on all the major book retailers, Barnes and Noble, Amazon, Indigo if you're in Canada. It's also available as a ebook with Kindle or an audiobook as
Wow,
well.
I love it. And if anyone wants to get in touch with you or learn more about the coaching that you do, how can they reach you?
Yeah, you can find me on my website, which is just Aly Bird, ALYBIRD.com, or you can find me on Instagram at the Aly Bird.
I love it. Thank you so much, Aly, for writing this book, for enduring so publicly as a griever and as someone who is inevitably grieving differently every day, like we said earlier, and still showing up and offering your heart to others. It's a significant offering. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Mandy. Thank you for the work that you do too. This is really important stuff. So thank you for putting your energy into it.
Thank you for listening to episode 243 of Restorative Grief. Becoming a grief ally isn't about finding the ultimate checklist and positioning yourself to become the hero of someone's story. It is about finding your own inner world as flexible, resourceful, humble, and courageous, so you can authentically arrive when you're needed the most. Hopefully, this conversation challenged your understanding of what is needed by grievers and gives you the encouragement to try something new to support yourself through the process of becoming a grief ally as well. Please be sure to connect with Aly online, and certainly buy a copy of her book, Grief Ally, wherever you get your reading materials. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, I'm so grateful that you're here. Every week, there is a new workbook available for my patron supporters in order to explore this content a little more fully and discover how these conversations can impact their own grief work in a way that is lasting and sustainable. So if you are interested in becoming a patron of the work, you can do so for as little as $2 a month by visiting patreon.com/Mandy Capehart, or check out the show notes for the link to the workbook, restorative grief coaching information online, and certainly to get in touch with Aly as well. Thank you as always to my past and current patrons, and you know what? Thank you to those of you who are future patrons and just don't have it set out yet. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast, leave a shiny 5-star review. And as always, before we go, one last thing. Please remember, the only solution for grief is to do the work of grieving. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week.